Welcome, Zoe. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to introduce to allow a few seconds to introduce yourself, Zoe, please.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. I'm Zoe Valerie. I'm in Corfu, and I come from dance. My art is dancing and dance therapy. And when I was younger, I believed that artistic activism was enough to change the world. And as time passed, I realized that education reform is more likely to improve things radically and deeply. So I was always teaching dance and movement, and the past 10 years I've focused my art, which also, as I said, includes therapy. So what I've developed over the past 20 years of working with full range of humans is called Ensoma, and it's basically about regaining and evolving neuroplasticity through micro movement and micro touch. So I'm focusing my art into educational reform, particularly for political situations where it's severely repressed.
Thank you very much. What might be a threshold situation that you are facing in your life right now or your work? In other words, your personal journey of unlearning and new ideas shaping.
When you say threshold, do you mean a point?
Yeah.
A critical point, tipping point.
Tipping point.
Exhaustion. I'm a single parent. I'm not financially comfortable, and I've been working voluntarily on this for 12 years now. But actually, my mother was doing it before me, so maybe it's transgenerational exhaustion is what the threshold is. So alongside all of this voluntary activism was also environmental activism, activism for the rights of all creatures, etc., etc. So it is exhausting, and I grew up in it, and it's financially exhausting. So I think the threshold at the moment is how to overcome the extreme exhaustion, and how to get up again and get up again and get up again and keep going, and how to network with the right kind of partners who operate with a different kind of support system than what I'm used to, at least, which is not so much a spiral of supporting each other multidimensionally. It always ends up being a giving, a pulling, a sucking relationship. But that takes a long time to explain what I mean.
We will come back in a way or another to this, because without knowing you, there were two concepts I put on the paper, and this is me promising not to talk.
Please talk.
Things before knowing before knowing you, before meeting you today, I wrote two concepts. Decolonialization of learning or education, but again, I didn't meet you. And second was collective trauma, or transgenerational trauma in learning or education. But and maybe you just touch upon those a bit. So let's see how this circle comes back. Zoe, listening to what you mentioned, could you share a bit from your background, maybe 2, 3 people, events, choices that triggered, you already mentioned some, your journey towards democratic learning or free learning or education?
Trees. I grew up in trees, and they're, for me, especially one tree is one of my mothers, and I spent my formative years in her, and she taught me about combinational existence, basically, and the dualism of the human world that I grew up in, at least, never made any sense to me. In her, basically, it was the only place, and in the ocean, that I felt comfortable as a creature. As a child, I was not exactly an anthropophile. I found humans very difficult to understand. Their cruelty, basically, was the most difficult thing for me to comprehend, and their parasitic behavior. So nature, but in general, especially the ocean and trees. My mother, who basically has been one of the most gentle warriors in the fight for the right to be something that someone who doesn't fit into the social protocol, let's say. My mentors, I'm lucky. My mentors are very, very many. So maybe that's enough, because you asked me for 1 or 2 people.
Okay, thank you very much, Zoe.
I have to pay tribute to the animals that I grew up with, and all the births and deaths that I lived with them. But you asked me something else as well. I didn't cover your question.
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
You covered it very well, actually. What is emerging for you with Reimagine Education? What unfolds? What do you think it's unfolding for you still?
Trust that there is enough of a dynamic within the humankind to reinforce and support each other to shift priorities radically. And this is something very particular to my experience in the Reimagining Education conference. What is still emerging is a deeper and deeper sense of security, even though the conditions are so let's say, threatening. In this conference, I felt that maybe the kind of community that I'm envisioning and wishing and praying for does actually exist, and that I and maybe we, our micro community, has somehow been missing it. So what's emerging is also very interesting questions of why and how we've been missing it.
Thank you. And connecting to this, maybe, last but not least for sure, how do we engage meaningfully with traditional wisdom for learning and education?
Deconstruct patriarchal systems, which for me, but also maybe objectively, are completely, utterly interconnected with capitalistic systems and colonialist systems and transgenerational trauma systems, and put it back, traditional knowledge, back into nature. If we don't put it back into nature, nothing makes full sense. There's always something that is inconsistent, and this causes maybe even subconscious confusion, which doesn't allow us to engage with traditional wisdom, to be able to sense it in its clean form, because its toxification is so old and ingrained that it's kind of taken for granted, whether you like it or not, to some extent. So if you take it out of the systems of patriarchy and capitalism and transgenerational trauma systems and put it back into the systems of ecology, I think that gives us a chance of engaging, well, to begin with, from a new starting point, maybe engaging in a better way, or being able to make better use of it, for sure.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Thank you very much for sharing your well, your journey, and not only for your compassion and for your emotional intelligence message for reimagining education. Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful questions.
Okay.